happens when the greatest monument to your success is built on a foundation of unforgivable lies, whispered repeatedly by the only person you ever truly needed to believe in you. Tonight, we uncover the steep price paid for ambition and witness the solitary moment when Alexander Thorne must decide if his triumph is real or just another cruel fabrication. He stood impossibly tall, a silhouette against the cold, metallic sky of the city, 30 stories of polished glass and sheer, audacious steel. The Thorne Tower, his name carved in granite, stared back at him, indifferent to the man below. The air was sharp, clean. It carried the faint, expensive scent of newly laid marble and dizzying success. He reached out his fingers, trailing over the cool, unforgiving surface of the base. It was solid, unshakable. Yet the stability was an illusion, because there was another sound, louder than the city's roar, sharper than the cutting wind. A familiar, corrosive phrase. You will never amount to anything. It wasn't a memory, it was a present sound. A low, dry whisper, laced with the smell of stale perfume and ancient disappointment. It echoed from a small, drab apartment, not from this gleaming, powerful structure. How could the man who owned the sky still be haunted by dirt? He closed his eyes. The height didn't matter. The millions didn't matter. The name didn't matter. Only the whisper remained. The whisper wasn't just noise. It was the foundation he'd built his empire upon. He opened his eyes, but the cold steel of the tower was replaced by the cheap laminate of the kitchen table. He was 12, maybe 13, clutching a B- report card like a death sentence. His father, Marcus, a man whose hands only knew the texture of oil and disappointment, didn't even look up from the evening paper. Beaminess, his mother, Eleanor, sighed, folding a damp dishcloth precisely. A Thorne accepts nothing less than a "you're just like your Uncle James, aren't you?" All big talk and messy outcomes. James, the family black sheep, was a name synonymous with ruin. What Alexander truly needed to know was why his mother feared Uncle James's shadow more than she desired Alexander's actual success. That comparison, the coupling with the disgraced uncle, was a lash he internalized. 2 years later, he tried to prove them wrong. He spent a summer mowing lawns, saving every cent, and presented his parents with a business plan, a schematic for a neighborhood delivery service using repurposed old bikes. Eleanor laughed, a dry, brittle sound that shattered the careful columns of his budget. "Delivery boy, we expected you to elevate the family name, Alexander, not run errands for pennies. You lack the necessary vision, dear. You just don't have asterisk. The lack of it became a ghost definition of his inadequacy, a phantom trait he spent decades trying to materialize. He still kept that wrinkled schematic, hidden in a lockbox whose combination only he knew, proving the failure was more valuable than the memory of the attempt. The worst part wasn't the direct assault, but the constant, insidious comparison to Robert, his older cousin, who had secured a respectable junior position at a local accounting firm. Robert was the model of mediocrity. They praised safe, predictable, unthreatening. Robert sends $50 home every month. Marcus would drone, cleaning his glasses with meticulous care. He understands commitment. You jump from one foolish dream to the next. Alexander, you confuse audacity with competent. Audacity, they implied, was a childish flaw, not a necessity for climbing 30 stories of steel. Alexander realized then that their criticism wasn't about him failing. It was about their paralyzing fear of anything unconventional. If Robert had failed spectacularly, would his parents have treated predictable failure with greater respect than ambitious striving? The humiliation had been a burning furnace, scorching him at every turn. But somewhere around his high school graduation, the pain started to crystallize. He didn't cry anymore. He calculated. He didn't run. He planned. The shame didn't disappear. It simply changed its density, becoming a core of molten iron in his gut. He stopped arguing and started listening, not to internalize the insult, but to catalog the specific metrics of their disappointment. If they wanted stability, he would build fortresses. If they questioned his vision, he would buy the horizon. He understood now. He didn't need to earn their love. He needed to purchase their silence. But the ultimate price of that silence was forfeiting the ability to love anyone, including himself, outside the rigid confines of success. When college applications came, he wanted architecture, the creation of beautiful, enduring structures. His father scoffed, pointing to the debt. A hobby, not a career. Accountants make money. Artists starve. Go into business, son. Learn how the world really works. Alexander enrolled in finance, a subject he loathed, watching his architectural blueprints collect dust in the bottom drawer. Every derivatives class, every late night calculating capital gains was a direct payment toward his parents' approval. He wasn't studying finance. He was studying the language of validation. He learned to mimic the ambition they expected, masking his own burning desires with spreadsheets. He never told them he graduated top of his class. He simply assumed they already knew, and their silence was just confirmation of their expectation, not their pride. His first big deal, brokering the sale of 3 defunct warehouses, netted him a commission large enough to buy his mother the small lakeside cottage she'd always dreamed of visiting. He drove out to the drab apartment, heart pounding, holding the deed like a shield. Eleanor glanced at the paperwork, her expression flat. "It's nice, Alexander. But these warehouses, they were full of asbestos, weren't they? You took advantage of that old couple, didn't you? Real success is clean success." She didn't accept the cottage. She hadn't even smiled. The victory tasted like ash. It wasn't the size of the triumph that mattered. It was the inherent belief that he, Alexander, was fundamentally tainted. He later realized she never believed his ability to earn money legally, confirming that the criticism wasn't based on results, but on his intrinsic character. That day, he stopped trying to give them comfort and started trying to buy their... He stopped calling them on Sundays. He disappeared into the city, using the sting of the cottage rejection as jet fuel. He became ruthless, efficient, and notoriously cold in negotiations, all traits they had accused him of lacking. If they called him manipulative, he would manipulate the market. If they called him arrogant, he would demand respect that bordered on worship. Every million added to his net worth was a brick laid in the wall between himself and the man who needed their simple approval. He often wondered if they secretly admired the monster they had created, or if they still saw only the messy 13-year-old with the beam. The Thorn Tower wasn't just a headquarters. It was a physical manifestation of that original, dry whisper. 30 stories of defiance. Every pane of glass screamed, "Asterisk, look at me now!" Asterisk, he had planned the dedication ceremony specifically for his parents, sending engraved invitations months in advance, scheduling a private viewing suite for them alone. He imagined Eleanor, finally humbled, touching the granite inscribed with his name, Marcus, finally silent. But they didn't come. They sent a card, a generic floral design, wishing him continuing prosperity. The card didn't explain the absence, suggesting that perhaps they hadn't rejected the building, but the very notion that Alexander was capable of genuine, lasting achievement. He was left standing alone, beneath the cold shadow of his own monument, realizing the terrible, simple truth. The validation he sought was never offered because the failure wasn't external. It was internal, prejudged. Their lack of belief wasn't a punishment for poor performance. It was a core belief about his essence, the towering success, the millions. The power it was all a magnificent suit of armor built to shield a vulnerable boy from a mother's sigh and a father's indifferent gaze. The armor worked flawlessly against the world, but it trapped the boy inside. He had succeeded beyond measure. Yet the corrosive whisper was right. He still hadn't amounted to anything in the only eyes that ever truly mattered. The armor was built brick by painful brick, not with blueprints, but with grudges. To understand the loneliness of Alexander standing under that cold granite, you had to see the squalor he climbed out of. Not poverty of money, but poverty of approval. He never needed applause, only the specific, horrified recognition from 2 people who swore he'd end up bagging groceries. This spite was cleaner fuel than oil, burning hotter and longer than any simple dream of wealth. It was a poison, yes, but it was his poison, and it made him immortal on the battlefield of ambition. He remembered the first real near miss, the moment the whole edifice almost crumbled. It happened 5 years into the venture, back when his office was a folding table wedged between a furnace and a leaky pipe in a subleased basement. He called it Synergy HQ, a joke only he understood. He hadn't slept for 72 hours straight, fueled by instant coffee and the sound of his father's dismissive laugh echoing in his skull. The initial investment money he'd borrowed, gambled, and sometimes outright stolen using legal loopholes was gone. He had $17 left in a payroll due in 4 hours for 3 disgruntled coders who hated him but needed the check. The clock was ticking down to complete ruin. What did he do then? Most people would panic. Alexander didn't have time for that luxury. He took the $17, bought a cheap bottle of scotch, and walked 3 blocks to the only man in the city more desperate and ruthless than himself. Silas Vane. Vane wasn't a bank. He was a viper waiting for easy prey. Alexander walked into that meeting knowing he wouldn't just be signing away equity. He'd be selling a piece of his soul, a promise of eternal, unethical servitude if Vane ever called him a favor. He knew he was trading long-term integrity for short-term survival. He got the money, but the cost was an anchor tied around his neck. That moment defined the next decade, a constant calculation of necessary evils. He stopped answering calls from old college friends who wanted to reminisce about beer pong. Those memories were irrelevant noise. Dating became transactional, a series of brief, functional interactions designed to prevent immediate burnout, never genuine connection. He learned to eat dinner alone, standing over the sink, staring blankly at spreadsheets displayed on 3 different monitors humming in the otherwise silent loft apartment. His only true companion was the burning resentment that reminded him why he couldn't afford a single moment of peace. He had mastered solitude, but it was beginning to corrode his edge. The relentless pace wasn't just physical, it was a psychic drain. There was a stretch, 6 years in, when he legitimately forgot the names of his 2 topics. He would call them Partner A and the accountant in his head. Then came the week he almost flatlined. He thought it was the flu, shaking and sweating through tailored shirts, still trying to close a multi-million-dollar acquisition over a crackling phone line. The doctor called it extreme exhaustion compounded by malnutrition and stress-induced cardiac arrhythmia. Alexander dismissed the diagnosis as soft. He checked himself out of the hospital 12 hours later, signing a waiver that basically admitted he valued his empire more than his own heartbeat. His definition of failure wasn't losing a contract or missing a quarterly target. Failure to Alexander was giving up. It was confirming his parents' silent judgment. This philosophy led him to take risks that were clinically insane. He leveraged everything twice, betting the entire company on a single software patent that experts swore was too unstable to monetize. He ignored their warnings, not because he was smarter, but because he didn't care about the downside. If he failed spectacularly, at least he would have tried until the absolute last possible second. He wasn't fighting for success. He was fighting against the surrender his family expected. People saw the polished CEO, the tailored suits, the calm demeanor in board meetings. They didn't see the kid curled up on the floor of his first office, crying silent, furious tears because he couldn't pay the server hosting bill. That raw, destructive anger wasn't purged. It was refined. It became a weapon. Every time a competitor underestimated him or an investor scoffed at his youth, that anger was funneled directly into the next 12 hours of impossible productivity. It was the toxic engine that ran the whole machine, a perpetual motion device fueled by eternal adolescent rage. He needed obstacles, because without a target for his fury, he feared the engine would stall completely. The first major acquisition, the one that really put synergy on the map, was brutal. He spent 48 hours straight negotiating with a hostile board, refusing bathroom breaks, surviving purely on adrenaline and spite. He closed the deal at 3 a.m. The champagne celebration was brief, a silent, cold glass raised to the empty office space. No cheers, no hype, just a profound, terrifying silence. He looked around and realized the trap. He had achieved the pinnacle of the mountain, only to find the view entirely monochromatic. The millions were flowing, the power was real, but the flavor was ash. He had sacrificed warmth for altitude, and the air up here was too thin for breathing. After that, there was no going back. He doubled down on the isolation, treating every human interaction, even with employees, as a tactical engagement. He became known in the industry as the ghost everywhere and nowhere, always working, utterly unreachable outside of pre-scheduled, hyper-efficient calls. His life was streamlined into pure functionality. He consciously pared away anything that brought comfort or distraction, viewing them as weaknesses the world could exploit. He believed vulnerability was currency, and he refused to spend a single cent. The construction of the headquarters, that towering monument of granite and steel, wasn't just a business move. It was a tangible, colossal manifestation of that poisonous ambition. He personally oversaw the site plans, insisting the foundation be dug deeper than necessary, symbolizing the depth of his commitment to never falling. Every beam raised, every piece of glass fitted, was a silent, screamed rebuttal to the 2 indifferent figures who lived 500 miles away. He built it as a beacon, a final, unassailable piece of evidence. He thought the building was the proof. He thought the asterisk would finally see, but standing beneath its shadow now, Empty and alone, he finally understood the terrible flaw in his design. A monument only validates the dead. The air in the sterile conference room was thick, smelling faintly of ozone and stale victory. Elias did not sit. He leaned against the obsidian table, watching the opposing legal team shuffle papers that represented 5 years of unrelenting pressure. They were tired, their shoulders slumped under the weight of their client's essay capitulation. This wasn't merely an acquisition. It was the final, brutal swallowing of Trident Securities by Elias's newly formed holding company, securing not just their assets, but the key municipal land rights required for the final phase of the HQ expansion. He glanced at the holographic projection displaying the full financial impact, a debt load that would crush most empires. Yet, for him, it was merely necessary leverage. The opposing counsel, Mr. Thorne, slid the final document across the table. It was thick, bound in dark leather, heavy with the implied promise of billions. Thorne's hand trembled slightly as he pushed the custom pen towards Elias. Elias took it, the movement economical and precise, his focus absolute. He didn't read the summary page again. He had already memorized every clause, every potential trap. He signed the document, the scratch of the iridium nib on the heavy paper, the loudest sound in the city block. He felt nothing resembling joy. Only the cessation of the relentless effort needed to reach this single point. Thorne cleared his throat, a sound of defeat. "It's done, Mr. Vance." Elias simply nodded. The silence that followed was heavy with implication. Thorne and his team gathered their belongings, moving like Elias waited until the heavy mahogany door clicked shut behind them, sealing the room. It was only then, alone in the high-rise suite overlooking the grid of the sleeping city, that he permitted himself a single, almost imperceptible exhalation. It wasn't a breath of relief, but rather the air being momentarily released from a chamber under immense pressure. The building was secured. The capital was locked in. But the true price of this victory remained entirely unknown. He moved to the tactical screen, ignoring the champagne bottle chilling on the side table celebrations with liabilities. His immediate priorities shifted from acquisition to orchestration. The world needed to see this move not as a desperate gamble, but as the inevitable conclusion of a masterful strategy. He pulled up the communication architecture, filtering through encrypted channels to reach his chief of strategy, Anya Sharma, who was waiting in a bunker miles away. He had specifically kept her out of the signing room, ensuring that if anything went wrong, she would be untainted and able to execute Plan B. Anye's face appeared sharp and alert, backlit by her own monitors. "Status," she whispered, though the connection was secure. "Executed," Elias replied, his voice flat. "Phase 3 deployment." The announcement must drop concurrently with the market open in Tokyo, followed by London, ensuring absolute global saturation within 18 hours. I want the narrative framed around sustainable dominance, not aggressive expansion. We are the gravity, Anya, not the collision. He paused, tapping a complex data stream detailing the shell corporations involved. And ensure the details regarding the acquisition of Site Delta remain completely obscured. They must think this was always about Trident's portfolio, not the land beneath it. Anya's eyes narrowed slightly. The public filings will require some creative accounting regarding Delta. Elias, the auditors will flag it. He allowed himself a small, chilling smile. Let them flag it. By the time they have enough grounds for an inquiry, the building will be finished, and the market will have absorbed the sheer, undeniable fact of our expansion. Perception is reality, Anya, and our reality is unassailable. I want the projections released tomorrow showing a 400% growth trajectory based solely on the synergized assets, completely omitting the actual capital expenditure required for the physical monument. I want them blinded by the future. Understood, Anya confirmed, her hand already moving across her keyboard, initiating the cascade protocol. The board is prepared to rubber stamp the emergency capital request as soon as the news breaks. They believe they are funding R&D, not construction. Elias nodded, acknowledging the necessary deception. The board, full of old money and cautious skepticism, would never have approved the true scale of the structure. They had been intentionally fed a palatable lie. But the biggest deception wasn't financial. It was the careful omission of asterisk. Why asterisk this specific location? Why this specific height? Why the specific defiant architecture had been chosen? He leaned closer to the screen, his reflection momentarily flickering across the glass like a glitch. The press conference. I want minimal presence. No grandstanding. I will appear for exactly 3 minutes, speak 3 pre-approved sentences about commitment and stability, and then vanish. the ghost remains the ghost. Anya hesitated. But Elias, this is your moment. After all this isolation, why hide the architect of the victory? Elias looked past the screen, through the window, towards the distant, half-finished skeletal structure of the tower, visible only as a dark disruption against the city lights. Because victory is not a display. It is a preparation for the next war. And the fewer people who see the general, the less they know about the army. He was still fighting those two indifferent figures. Even now, by refusing the spotlight, Anya knew better than to argue, though she worried about the psychological toll this constant operational secrecy took on him. Her loyalty was absolute, yet sometimes she wondered what exactly she was protecting: the company, or the fragile, toxic structure of Elias's ambition. The satellite uplink is ready for the simultaneous release in T-6 hours. Sleep now, Elias. You have earned it. He barely heard her. Sleep was a luxury he had long ago One last thing, Anya. Triple the surveillance on the southern periphery of the headquarters site. I have a lingering feeling about the old utility easement. Ensure nothing, and I mean asterisk, nothing asterisk, compromises the foundation now. He terminated the call without a goodbye, leaving Anya staring at a black screen. He walked slowly back to the obsidian table. The signed documents lay there, inert evidence of the monumental shift in power. He picked up the custom pen, turning it over in his hand. It wasn't just a writing instrument. It contained a tiny, embedded recording device, a relic from his early days of corporate He had recorded every word spoken in the room, not because he distrusted Thorne, but because he distrusted the world. The deal was closed. The capital secured. The building would rise. But as he stood there, surrounded by the silence of his achievement, the bitter taste of knowing that the structure was built entirely for an audience that might never care remained the ultimate unspent currency of his existence. Elias watched the feed from the secure camera embedded high above the pedestrian crosswalk. He had engineered this precise moment with the surgical clarity he reserved only for revenge and high finance. Her daily route, unchanged for 2 decades, brought her past the corner of Grand and Fifth precisely at 4:32 p.m., just as the evening sun caught the specially treated feed. He wanted the light to hit the inscription just right. She had often said he was wasting his time with those ridiculous dreams, and the memory was a dull, constant ache he carried like a necessary stone. He saw her turn the corner, a small, sturdy woman carrying the grocery bag exactly the way she always did, gripping the plastic handles until her knuckles went white. She was looking down, focused on the cracks in the pavement, the small, immediate realities of her world. The noise of the city, the horns, and the distant rumble of the subway seemed to press in on her, yet she moved with the oblivious rhythm of routine. Elias noted the slight hitch in her gait, a new stiffness he hadn't noticed in the staged photographs he received monthly. She reached the designated viewing point. The building was a beast of glass and steel, already eclipsing the neighboring towers, though it was still months from completion, its skeletal frame soared, demanding attention. Yet she walked right past the temporary barricades. It took a full 10 steps before something, perhaps the sheer, impossible shadow it cast in the late afternoon, pulled her gaze upward. It wasn't the building that snagged her attention first. It was the strange, almost alien glow of the holographic presentation projected onto the protective scrim 20 stories up. The architects had assured him the temporary rendering would be unavoidable to anyone within a 50-foot radius, making evasion impossible. Her walk stuttered. Not a full stop, but a momentary lapse in momentum. She tilted her head slightly, the heavy bag dipping toward the pavement. She wasn't processing the architecture. She was simply looking at the light show, trying to categorize it, perhaps wondering if it was a new advertisement for affordable housing or another meaningless corporate announcement. Her expression was utterly blank, practical, and slightly annoyed. Elias felt a cold spike of familiar rage. That same blankness had greeted his high school valedictorian speech and his university acceptance letter. Then her eyes tracked downward, following the laser-etched lines of the temporary display where the logo was anchored. It was an abstract, geometric marker, clean and aggressive, representing the newly consolidated entity. Below the graphic, rendered in block, mercilessly large, capital letters, was the corporate name. And below that, in slightly smaller, though still dominant typeface, was the simple impossible dedication. The Elias K. Thorne Global Innovation Center, she saw the letters, but they were just shapes for a second longer. She always claimed he hadn't focused enough on stability, that his middle initial K stood for cows instead of his grandfather's name. The light of the setting sun was perfectly angled now, hitting the reflective surface just enough to make the three words Elias Thornburn against the gray scrim. Her lips, dry and thin, parted slightly, but no air escaped. It was the physical reaction of a person who has walked into a solid wall. The recognition was slower than Elias anticipated, dragging through the years of doubt and dismissal she had built around him. He remembered the night she threw his business plan into the fireplace, calling it fantasy scribbled on stolen napkins, a memory that now felt as distant as a myth. The grocery bag finally slipped from her grasp, hitting the sidewalk with a soft thud. A carton of milk rolled 3 inches away, unnoticed. That was the moment of full saturation. The sheer scale of the building, the hundreds of workers visible on the higher platforms, the security perimeter, the cost toll distilled down to the single, undeniable fact written in steel and light. Her son had done this. Not just a job or a business, but this monument. Her gaze remained locked on the name, fixed in a terrible, silent reverence. It was the first time in his life Elias had seen his mother's body language scream a question she knew she would never articulate. How? Elias, watching the camera feed miles away, held his breath, waiting for the flinch, the tear, the sign of remorse or pride, any verbal or emotional release. But there was nothing. Her shoulders, so stiff minutes earlier, seemed to slump inward. Not in defeat, but in a profound, heavy acceptance. The silence of her reaction, amplified by the distant roar of the city, was more deafening than any shouted accusation could have been. She stood there, completely motionless, accepting the validation she had unwittingly demanded decades ago. He realized with a chilling clarity that this silence was not a surrender. It was a reckoning, demanding a payment beyond the simple erection of a structure. She didn't move for 92 seconds. The time felt vast, stretching back to the day he left home with nothing but a borrowed 20 and a grudge. The name on the wall was not merely an acknowledgement of his success. It was the final, devastating proof that the foundation she had built for him, one based on caution and restriction, had been dangerously flawed. The building was a monument to his defiance, and she was standing precisely in its shadow. A traffic warden blew a whistle nearby, a sharp, meaningless sound that cut across the emotional gravity of the moment. Yet she didn't even blink. Slowly, almost robotically, she bent down, retrieving the carton of milk and the plastic bag. She didn't look up again, not at the towering structure, not at the blinding name. She simply adjusted her grip, straightened her back slightly, and resumed her path. Walking away from the colossal proof of her son's existence and power, there was no look back, no final glance of pride or regret, only forward momentum into the anonymous bustle of the sidewalk. Elias watched until she disappeared entirely from the frame, realizing that he had constructed a triumph so immense it had rendered her invisible. But the hollow space inside him remained untouched. The feed went static as she rounded the next block. Elias sat back in his chair, the custom pen still in his hand, the one with the recording device. He hadn't needed to record this encounter. The memory was seared into his optic nerves. He had sought validation and received absolute, terrifying confirmation. Her silence was the currency of the exchange, paid in full. But the foundation of the physical structure was still vulnerable to the utility easements he had worried about earlier. He knew he had gained everything in the light, but the danger still lurked in the dark corners. He wondered if she, in her years of quiet observation, knew more about the vulnerabilities of the old city infrastructure than his entire security team combined. He leaned forward, pulling the architectural schematics toward him, the massive, silent confirmation of his name on the glass fading behind the immediate necessity of protecting the groundwork. The monument was built, but the war, he understood now, was far from over. The real battleground was always beneath the surface. Elias traced the faint red lines marking the utility easements. The vulnerabilities weren't flaws in the physical design, they were the moral seams holding the edifice together. He realized the final battle wasn't against her knowledge of the infrastructure. It was against the infrastructure of his own conscience. He had sought the silent moment of vindication the instant she realized his triumph had eclipsed her entire existence. He achieved it. It felt like nothing. Worse, It felt like subtraction. He leaned forward, resting his forehead on the cool glass of the window. The city lights blurring into a meaningless constellation of ambition. Was the ultimate success defined by the achievement itself or by the silent moment of vindication? The answer struck him with the force of a physical blow. Neither. Success was the integrity you maintained while climbing. He had arrived at the peak, but he was fragmented, a ruin wrapped in marble. The external approval was the poison that promised immortality. The internal cost had been absolute, the structure was complete, the war was won, but the self was utterly, terrifyingly annihilated. He stood, slowly, letting the customized pen slip from his fingers and clatter silently onto the polished desk. He looked one last time at the schematics, not seeing easements or foundations, but the ghosts of the man he used to be, buried beneath the blueprints. He had won the war, only to realize the fortress he built was designed solely to keep himself imprisoned. Thank you for watching this conclusion. If you enjoyed this journey into architectural obsession and the high cost of success, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below.